What is up, y'all? Welcome back to Rough Drafts. My name is Sam Pratt. Today, I am going to be walking through my least favorite to favorite sets of 2025. I realize I might be a little late on this. This episode is coming out on January 8th, and it's covering 2025, a look backwards. But I wanted this to be the last episode before Lorwyn comes out, before I do my Lorwyn preview episode. And I think that that's sort of like the turning of the Magic year. So I think this is still a very appropriate time to do this before we look ahead to 2026. So I'm going to be walking through my sets from least favorite to favorite. Spoiler alert, with the large exception of one set in particular. I thought this set was an amazing year for Limited. I'm going to be giving like a number grade for each of the sets. And the number grade for all of these is abnormally high. I do think that 2025 was the best Limited year ever. Obviously, this is all super subjective. I know other people didn't like the sets as much, but I felt like every single set of this year, with the exception of Spider-Man, had something really unique to offer, and I had a lot of fun, playing all of the sets, diving into the sets, etc. So let's talk about Spider-Man a little bit first. I'm not actually going to talk about the set itself. I'm not even going to honor it with a number grade at all. I will start with one positive. The pace of sets is so breakneck in 2025, 2026. Like, we're getting 7 sets next year. We had 6 in 2025. I do think it was kind of nice to have a WotC mandated break from Booster Draft. Like, I covered Spider-Man on this podcast for a couple weeks. I think I did 3 or 4 episodes. But after that, I took a break from playing Limited. I played a lot of Cube. I worked on Cube. I also just took a break from Magic in general. I do think it's kind of nice to have a set like this come out and I just can check out for a little bit. I think that's healthy. I'm not going to take a break in the podcast when we get these because we do have 2 small sets confirmed for next year. But I do think it's nice to have a little bit of a break from, set review, preview episode, first week episode, wrap up, etc. That whole thing. I think it's nice that we have sort of a WotC mandated break for Booster Draft. Like I said, we do have 2 small sets confirmed for next year. The Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles set, which will come out, I think, in March, is going to be a small set, like a small pick 2 set. Then we don't know which one, but one of the other universes beyond, either Hobbit or Star Trek, probably The Hobbit, is also confirmed to be a small set. I really don't like it. I think that there's been a lot of discussion about what the problems with Spider-Man was, whether that was its tumultuous development or the pick 2 nature or whatever, or the theme. I honestly don't think that any amount of design polish can overcome the disappointment that comes from having a 180 card limited format. Like, Spider-Man was obviously as bad as it could get, at least I think. But I don't think that any of these sets, even if they come out and knock it out of the park, it's still going to be a small set. It's going to have a really limited shelf life. There's probably only going to be 5 supported archetypes. Just I'm really not excited about small sets in general. I think I will still continue to cover them for, a couple weeks. But like I said, I am going to view these next year as sort of like a WotC mandated break from Limited in general after dipping my toes in for however many drafts I feel like. So Spider-Man was the one dark spot in 2025. I do think the other 5 sets were absolute bangers. My least favorite, my 5th place set, was Edge of Eternities, which I am giving, if I had to slap a number grade on it, I would say it was a 6 out of 10. I'm trying to be critical. I'm trying to use the entire spectrum of 1 to 10. And I will point out that a set, the lowest set of the year, more or less, getting a 6 out of 10 is really, really good. There have been other years, like last year, 2024, I would have given Bloomburrow and Modern Horizons 3 grades that were well below 5 out of 10. So I do think that Edge of Eternities with a 6 out of 10 as the lowest is still really impressive. And the thing that I remember about Edge of Eternities that I picked up on when I was looking through Scryfall just to look at the cards, refresh my memory, was that Edge of Eternities had a ton of really individually interesting designs. I think it had some good mechanics. But I think the like limited structure of the mechanics left a little bit to be desired for Edge of Eternities. But I think at an individual card level, there were so many cards that just played really interestingly, that like had a lot of interesting play to them within the cards themselves. I just have like a list of cards that I picked out that I thought were really cool. Depressurized, Night Luminary, Pinnacle Killship, Self-Craft Mechan, Zookeeper Mechan, Nanoform Sentinel, Cryo Shatter, All Fate Stalker, Edge Rover, Codecracker Hound, the named land mechanic, the 1/3 hexproof thing, Perigee Beckoner, Nebula Dragon. So many cool cards. A lot of these are at common too, that just like didn't look like anything we had ever like played before. Like Night Luminary is kind of like adventure. This one's like pretty vanilla, but there was like a lot of interesting tension over, do you play it on turn 2? Do you save it and just like curve out with it on turn 4? Codecracker Hound had a lot of play. Like, do you warp that on curve or do you just play the 2/1 body? I think that the individual card designs for this format was a huge high point of this format, and the reason that it gets as high a grade as a 6 out of 10. I ended up really liking the spacecraft mechanic. I think that it's a mechanic that there were probably too many spacecraft in the set. A lot of the cards, like I'm thinking about the 2 red uncommon spacecraft, just like flopped, like they just did not matter. But I do think that spacecraft had a pretty interesting presence in the format. I think we're almost definitely going to get a bunch of spacecraft for Star Trek. So I'm interested in seeing the second iteration of the mechanic. I also think the warp mechanic was a very, very good limited mechanic. Maybe one of the best mechanics of the year, to be honest. One of the negatives I think about this set when I look back on it was the absence of dual lands, both in the fact that we were drafting with 13 card packs. You know, when we get dual lands like with Avatar, they're usually in like 50% of packs instead of a basic. There were no like dual lands. There was no just like good fixing at common for your 2-color deck. Splashing was still a part of the format via lander tokens, especially in green. But I just remember always just having to register these clunky 9/8 mana bases and being really unhappy with that. Obviously, if they push the fixing too much, the format gets way too soupy because of the presence of lander tokens in this format just being like a lot of rampant growths in the set. But I do think I really wish there was like an Uncharted Haven variant or an Evolving Wilds variant in this format, or maybe just like dual lands at like 25%. Just I wanted something so that I wasn't registering 9/8 mana base draft after draft. Overall, though, I did like Edge. Like I said, 6 out of 10. For each of these formats, I'm going to be naming my favorite card from the limited format. And then as a little bonus, I'm also going to name my favorite cube card from each of these formats. So my favorite card from the limited format, I think I have to give it to Self-Craft Mechan. Just to refresh your memory, this was the common 4-mana 3/4 in blue. It was an artifact, and when it enters, you may sack an artifact. When you do, put a 1/1 counter on target creature and draw a card. Thought this played really cool. There was a lot of ways to produce artifacts that you were cool with sacking to this. I thought it was an interesting kind of build around at common. There's a lot of tension of what are you actually going to sacrifice. I thought this card was a really cool addition to the format and one of the many like very cool individual designs that they gave us at common. My favorite cube card from Edge of Eternities was definitely Icetill Explorer. This card has made waves in various constructed formats. In my own cube, my arena cube, I have 2 cycles of fetch lands. This is obviously really good with fetch lands. I also have Strip Mine. It enables like the entire Strip Mine deck. I think this is sneakily a very strong green card, provides so much value, and the more graveyard matters green cards we get, the better this is. I'm thinking like Uro is a really good card with this. Esper Origins is another card that I really like in Cube that plays well out of the graveyard. So I think Icetill Explorer kind of has enabled archetypes of itself. Icetill Explorer is kind of like the whole package for green cards. So that's my favorite Cube card from Edge. All right, moving on to my 4th favorite set of the year. This is actually going to be a 2-way tie for 3rd. And the two sets that are tied for third for me, both I'm giving an 8.5 out of 10, which is actually still really, really strong. Like I said, I do think this is my favorite year of Limited ever. The two sets that are tied are the two Universes Beyond sets in Final Fantasy and Avatar. So I'm going to talk about Final Fantasy first. And it might be a hot take that effectively this is like my fourth favorite set of the year, third favorite set of the year. I know a lot of people have declared Final Fantasy to be like the GOAT format or among those. I love this set. I loved Final Fantasy. I think it's amazing. The other sets of the year just like had a little bit more for me. Final Fantasy is like it's kind of like the platonic ideal Magic set for Limited. It's very balanced. All of the mechanics were good. There's a lot of interesting diversity in decks, like a lot of different types of decks. The blue-red or like just the blue mana value 4 or greater non-creature spell stuff was a huge hit. I think that making that mechanic work with the tiered mechanic was really good, a really good win, a very like unique thing to do. The other mechanics were just really good, like Job Select was just like, this is just a great mechanic. Anytime equipment can play a part in Limited, I think is a huge win. Equipment just gives you so many options of ways to spend your mana turn after turn. I think the Saga creatures were a really interesting puzzle to figure out. Not all of them hit, but most of them saw a lot of play. I'm thinking like Summon Fat Chocobo was a very good card. There's a lot to like about Final Fantasy. If you are the type of drafter that cares most about gameplay, I think the gameplay in this set was really good. And I think the set being as balanced as it is in terms of colors mean that you play against a variety of decks draft after draft. And I think that that is what pushes it into GOAT tier for a lot of people. For me, this is going to be like a common theme that I talk about with the other sets of the year. I care a little bit more about what I'm doing than what my opponents are doing. Like, I really like cooking in terms of like cooking in the draft, like finding these weird like niche strategies that I can build around or like individual cards that I can build around. And Final Fantasy had like some of that, but I found that a lot of the color pairs, like your black-red deck, which was probably my favorite deck to draft in the format, your black-red deck doesn't look super different from draft to draft. There's obviously some variation. It depends on the color pair too. But like your blue-red deck is going to look vaguely similar every single time. And I don't feel like I was building archetypes outside of the two color pairs as often as I would like to push this into like a GOAT format for myself. I'm still giving it like a really good grade, like 8.5 out of 10 is still really strong. It's just like doesn't really check all of the boxes for me for GOAT status. It's just like there's absolutely nothing wrong with this format. It's just like missing a little bit of variety for me because I care more about what I'm doing in the draft than what I'm playing against. My favorite limited card in this format is absolutely Sorceress's Schemes. This is one of the first episodes I did of this format was Sorceress's Schemes, which was a card that I actually picked out of the data. Like the data showed it was doing well, and I said there's absolutely no way this is correct. And then the card ended up being really, really cool. I give an honorable mention to Cornered by Black Mages, which is a card that I thought there's no way this is going to be good. And then it ended up being really strong. The cornerstone to both like the black-red and the black-white decks, which were some of my favorite decks to draft in the format as well. My favorite cube card is definitely the Mythic Sephiroth. I have a huge soft spot for sacrifice decks in cube. I think that the vintage cube, like the Magic Online vintage cube, could definitely serve to support sacrifice a little more because I think that it doesn't really take much for the good sacrifice cards to shine. Like white in particular gives you tokens, like just the good cards, the good white cards make multiple bodies. And that's really all you need to do to enable sacrifice cards. Something that I don't like in cubes is cards like Blood Artist that are kind of like these really easily killable enchantment creatures. They just like sit there, don't interact in combat, and your opponent can just kill them. Like, I don't think Blood Artist is a good card, but having the Blood Artist effect on a very reasonable creature, like a 3/3 that can get into combat, also has other utility with drawing cards. I think that Sephiroth is like the perfect card for these sacrifice decks, where it's a very individually solid card on its own, both in stats and ability, and also lends itself well to these sacrifice decks. Like, you can just throw Sephiroth into a deck that makes a lot of tokens, or maybe is running like Bloodghast or Dread Wanderer, and it's going to perform really well without a lot of like moving pieces in your deck. So I really appreciate getting a playable Blood Artist effect for reasonably high powered cubes. The other set tied for third at an 8.5 out of 10 is Avatar. I feel really similarly with this set as I do with Final Fantasy, where there's just like nothing wrong with this set. It's very, very balanced. Everything in the set, like all of the color pairs, work. I think that if you look at it objectively, as for whatever that means, I think that almost everyone's going to put Final Fantasy ahead of Avatar. And I think that's totally fair. I just think that Avatar sort of checks my own personal boxes a little bit more than Final Fantasy did. I think a big reason for that for me was that the variations of builds of each individual like color pairs, there were more like variety of decks. Like, my blue-white decks look different draft after draft. Like, I was a more blue deck with a white splash, or a white deck with a blue splash. I found like the draft portion of Avatar to be, slightly more fun to me than Final Fantasy. I won't go too deep into Avatar because I just spent last week wrapping it up. I will reiterate that all 4 bending mechanics being so unique, so cool, and fitting so well flavorfully, I think was just a huge slam dunk, a huge win. I have a stronger connection to the Avatar property, like the intellectual property, than I do to Final Fantasy. So that's also a factor for me for sure, whether subconscious or overt. I think the one big downside of this set that I really did not like was the bonus sheet. The Final Fantasy bonus sheet was similar, but I felt like that one showing up more often meant you had more reason to play around the cards on it. The Avatar bonus sheet was so rare, and just some of the cards were just really miserable to play against. Like, I have died to Blasphemous Act 3 times in this format, which just like, the cards just look terrible. They're horrible game pieces. They look bad. None of them are the correct color. They're hard to read. I think people are really, I hope, not liking these bonus sheets, and I hope that they take note of that and stop printing them for the Universes Beyond sets. I love bonus sheets in general, just saying. I hope we get one for Strixhaven, like we did the first time, because I think the traditional bonus sheets add a lot to limited formats, but the really rare ones with the cards that look not like Magic cards, I think need to go. My favorite limited card in Avatar was Cave of Two Lovers. Part of the reason I like this so much was because I kept getting past it, like pick 8, pick 7, which is way too late. This is like close to the best red card in the set, like including rares. Like, this is a top 5 red card in the set. I think it is very strong. It was really fun to play with. Just like a very good mid-range card. Sagas are awesome. Yeah, I love Cave of Two Lovers. My favorite cube card. There were a couple that I really like from the set, but the early returns for me, my favorite cube card from the set is Suki, Courageous Rescuer. This card performs sort of double duty. It's a really strong aggressive card. Like, if you can go 1-drop, 2-drop, Suki attack with your 2 pumped creatures that drop something when they die. That's a really strong card for white aggro. I think it's kind of like a texture of a card we haven't seen before in terms of like being both an anthem and something that drops bodies. And I also really like it. I'm going to go back to like sacrifice decks, but I really like it in sacrifice decks as well. Just the fact that you can turn your cardboard into more cardboard for value, something that I really like. It works well with fetch lands, which is another point of interest for my cube in particular. Yeah, I think this card's really cool, very powerful as well. All right, moving on to number 2. I'm putting Tarkir Dragonstorm as my number 2 set. My number rating is going to be 8.6 out of 10, so just a notch above Avatar and Final Fantasy. I think this is a kind of a hot take. I think Tarkir was a lot of people's least favorite full-size release of 2025 for Limited. I'm going to get on a little bit of a soapbox about this format. I think it's pretty misunderstood and misrepresented. I keep hearing people talk about Tarkir as a 2-deck format. And the implication is that the 2 decks are Boros on one end and the 5-color Dragon Soup on the other end. I agree with the Boros half of it. I think that Boros was the best deck in the format. It was the most played deck in the format. I think in part by nature of it being, there just being so many different ways to put together 3-color combinations in the format, that Boros was like the one 2-color deck that really worked. It was really, really strong. It was a huge pillar of the format. It definitely put a sort of constraint on what you could do. It was like the fun police. The other pillar, though, I don't feel that the 4 to 5 color Dragonstorm Globe Soup deck was actually a large pillar of the format in the way that people talk about this format. This deck, like the Dragonstorm deck, had a moment. It was BK at the Spotlight Series on camera winning the whole event with it, and he went on like LR and talked about the deck. But after that episode drop, Dragonstorm Globe was so overrated. In my opinion, it was overrated the entire format. I barely played any globes the whole format. It was so hard to get into an actually good Dragonstorm deck. And I think that I played against a lot of people trying to do the dragons pile thing, like the soup dragons, just saying words, soup dragon pile globe storm deck. There were so many people trying to do this 5-color deck that just like was not coming together. And I was destroying people trying to make these bad piles. My view on the format is that the non-Boros section of the format, which is still like 80% of the format, had an incredibly rich texture that rewarded deep format knowledge and creativity in the drafting portion. I'm going to name just some of the archetypes that I was able to consistently draft throughout the format. There was all of the green beatdown decks, the Champion of Doosan decks, which was not only green black base, there was the whole counter synergy. This deck was very good at the end of the format. There was also green blue tempo. I played a lot of green white, just putting the good beatdown green cards and the good beatdown white cards in the same deck. And I played a lot of green red as well, like green red tricks beatdown. These are all decks that I played more than once, trophied with a bunch of times. I think that the green beatdown decks was a big part of the format for me. I played it way more than I played any 5-color deck. You had Temur mid-range decks. You had Jeskai mid-range decks. You had blue-red tempo decks built around Wild Ride and the flurry mechanic. This was like a thing that you could do. There were versions of red-white or Boros that would play like this tempo flurry style game plan, and you could basically do the same thing in blue-red as well. I played a lot of like Jeskai control decks built on Osseous Exhale. I built a lot of blue-red base decks. I remember I had one that trophied in particular that had 0 2-drop creatures because I had so much 2-mana interaction that I was able to actually build a draw-go control deck. Even within Boros, I remember at one point in the format, I drafted and trophied with Boros 4 times in a row, and every single build was significantly different from the rest. There was one that was built around Flurry. There was one that was the traditional Go Wide. There was one in that run where I built around Tempest Hawk, the Collect 'em All version. I had a lot of success in this format. I got to Mythic at a 70% win rate, and I was playing very rarely more than 3 colors. Like sometimes in my more mid-range, like soupy decks, I would splash an off-color bomb as a 4th color, but I was very rarely in the actual Dragonstorm Globe pile deck. I don't think that this deck was actually that good, especially once it was on people's radars. And while I think it is a fair complaint if it feels like you play against the same stuff draft after draft, because honestly, I think people were really bad at this format. And I played a lot of opponents that were just like kind of casting random cards. And when your opponents are doing that a lot, it does feel like you're playing against a lot of just like random soup. But like I said earlier in this episode, to me, it matters a lot more what I'm doing, and it's more satisfying for me to be able to feel like I'm building something myself in the draft. To me, that matters a lot more than what my opponents are doing in terms of my enjoyment and longevity of a format. So I totally understand that this format is not everyone's cup of tea. There are some very legitimate complaints. I think Boros was too good in this format. Just all things considered, it was a very, very strong deck. And I also do think that the rares in this format were egregious in a way that they weren't in Avatar. They did do a good job of putting all of the most busted rares at Mythic. It was basically just Moraine River region below Mythic that was like really egregious, but a lot of the rares were like Ureni and Jeskai Revelation, which like actually did invalidate everything that came before. Elspeth Stormslayer, which is a card I absolutely despise. There are some legitimate concerns about this format. I had this as a GOAT tier format for me after it came out, and as we've moved away, I've bumped it down into merely just great. But it did really scratch a lot of the itches that I look for in a limited format, which is why it was my second favorite format of the year, and it's still at a very high score. My favorite limited card in this format has to be Champion of Doosan. It was effectively the first episode of this podcast. I sort of theory crafted the green beatdown deck after playing it once or twice. And it ended up being a strategy that I worked with for the entire format. Champion of Doosan is a very special place in my heart. My favorite cube card in this format is Kishla Skimmer. Kishla Skimmer is the exact type of cube card I love, where it is a very reasonable body. It's just a 2/2 flyer for 2, which is just a very solid stat line, and gives you an effect that's very powerful, but not like over the line, and asks you to do something special. Kishla Skimmer works with like Deathrite Shaman. It works with Uro in the same color pair. It works with all sorts of things that pull things out of your graveyard, like Eternal Witness. If you're running like Soul Guide Lantern or Relic of Progenitus, you can build like an engine like that. I really like it paired with Molt Tender from Aetherdrift. It's just right in the sweet spot of card that is not oppressive, but has like a good stat line, so it just fits into your deck no matter what, and like asks you to tweak your pick order just a little bit. Which brings me to my number one format of the year. This was a sleeper. It's Aetherdrift. I'm giving Aetherdrift an 8.9 out of 10. Like I said, I'm being really critical with the grading scale, trying to use the whole thing. I think that I would never give a format a perfect 10. So I think getting really close to 9 is very good for this format. Aetherdrift, so I know that Lords of Limited also did their end of year like review last week, and they also put Aetherdrift as the best format of the year. And the journey that they went on was the exact same journey that I went on, which is that like Aetherdrift was like, to me, just a pretty good format. But the further away we get from it, the more I look back on the actual cards in Aetherdrift and just like really look back fondly on a lot of the individual designs and the decks that were available to me. And I really think that this format was very underappreciated in its time. It just offered so many interesting things to do that were very unique to Aetherdrift itself. I think the mechanics are not a particularly strong point for this format. Like vehicles being the central thing was not like the greatest limited infrastructure for a set. Like there were it really just came down to the individual designs of the vehicles themselves. I liked Start Your Engines a lot, and it had a lot of interesting moments, but I don't think this is like an all-timer mechanic. But I do think the texture of Aetherdrift, just the texture of what the format was about and all of the things that came from that was so interesting. And there were so many individual decks and cards that I really, really like from it. If you don't remember Aetherdrift, green was by far the best color, but green was the best color in a way where it was extremely beatable. Like the green deck was just like not oppressive in the same way that Tarkir, like Boros, is oppressive. Like they were just playing a bunch of stats and curving out. And I actually figured out pretty early in the format that green had a pretty big weakness to like the white control decks. Like white control was able to use Ride's End as a very valuable control tool. And I used this white control deck infrastructure as sort of a launching pad for a lot of different things in this format. This is very much my subjective ranking. I think that Aetherdrift in particular is very well tailored to my own proclivities as a drafter, specifically being able to build non-green, multicolor, mid-range control decks, and just had a lot of things that I had never done before in Limited. The biggest card that comes to mind is Starting Column, which just did everything that every single one of my decks was asking for. You know, it was fixing, it was a start your engines enabler, it was card advantage in the late game, it was acceleration to sort of set up your engine. The deck that sort of set off the rabbit hole I went down in this format was a white-red control deck that was double splashing Haunt the Network, which, by the way, Haunt the Network also is a card that I just looked back with so much fondness. I think it had so much interesting play too. Like, are you trying to like Zenith Flare them out, or are you casting it early and trying to get in chip damage with the Thopters? I just think about all the decks that I drafted. There was like the blue-red cycling discard deck, which could either be sort of like this combo deck or like an aggro deck. There was a lot of texture there. There were all the Esper artifact decks, which could be a spectrum of strictly blue-black, strictly blue-white, or like a 3-color pile deck. There were the Mardu Start Your Engines builds of like black-white aggro, black-red aggro. There was like one of the best limited build-arounds we've had in so long in Push the Limit, which was just such an interesting build-around for the format. I think similar to Edge of Eternities, there were a lot of interesting individual cards. Whether this was I think all of the signposts were really interesting in this format. There was like the Skyseeker Serpent, which I thought was a really cool card. There was Veteran Beast Rider, which was the green-white card that untapped your creatures every turn. A lot of interesting commons and uncommons that I look back on fondly. Stampeding Scurryfoot was really cool. Wreckage Wickerfolk is just like such a nice 2-drop to play. Just felt so good. Packdoll Terror was interesting. Stock Up was so much fun to cast. Aether Siphon was a card that I clowned on so much in preview season and ended up being a very real part of the format. I thought the rares were really good in this format. There were some egregious ones like Sabsunin, but there were a lot of gold cards that were just really fun to play. This format just like ticks all the boxes for me in terms of having a wide variety of things to do, both in the 10 prescribed color pairs as well as things beyond those color pairs or different builds of each individual deck. And after thinking about it a lot and looking at the cards, just like seeing how fondly I remember all of the cards, especially like Starting Column, I really do think that this set, the further we get away from its release, the more I look fondly on it. And I think this is my favorite set of the year. My favorite card in Aetherdrift, I'm not going to give it to Starting Column. It maybe Starting Column deserves it, but I just want to talk about Thunderhead Gunner a little bit. It's another card that was so unassuming. Like, no one thought that this card was going to be any good. And then the first time you cast it, you're like, oh, this is a problem. It's huge. It blocks everything. The discard stuff was like so neat. It was just like such a unique card, such a unique shape for a card to be good. That this is really my favorite card to cast in the format. And also the art is just so funny. It's just like this whale shark guy with a laser cannon. My favorite cube card from this set. This was also a little bit difficult. I'm naming Monument to Endurance as my favorite cube card. Monument's finally getting some love in Vintage Cube as sort of like one of the tier 2 discard archetypes. This one's a little bit tougher to support than something like Kishla Skimmer because it does stone nothing until you discard. But it's a really fun build around for Cube because so many of the discard cards are just like good. Thinking like Evora, Voldaren Epicure, Scrapwork Mutt, Chart a Course, Wheel of Fortune. There's just so many cards that incidentally discard that you don't have to go too far out of your way to include narrow cards in your cube to support a discard archetype. And Monument to Endurance is just like so much fun to cast and go off with. So that's going to be my favorite card from Aetherdrift for cube. Overall, I do think I have somewhat rose tinted glasses for this set because it was my first year as a limited podcast. I covered 5 of the 6 sets, was not podcasting for Aetherdrift, but I do think Aetherdrift was a format that I went so deep on that it gave me a lot of confidence to start a podcast. I really felt like in Aetherdrift, I was doing a lot of things that no one else was doing, which was a huge confidence booster into actually starting the podcast. But overall, I think that this is my favorite limited year of all time. Like I said before, in most years, there are sets multiple that I would give below a 5 out of 10. Like there's a lot of hit or miss. And I think that all 5 of the major releases, excluding Spider-Man, of course, which in my mind doesn't really count, never really had a fair shot. I think that all 5 of the big releases were hits, like had a lot of really good things going for them. And obviously this is like my subjective opinion. You don't have to agree, but I just think that the quality of limited sets has really gone up, and has stayed consistently good for all of this year. As we look forward to 2026, I want to thank everyone that has listened to the podcast in 2025. I am consistently blown away with how many people listen to me talk about Magic cards every single week. So I really appreciate you listening. I think the support that I've gotten for the podcast has been a little bit unbelievable in the span of a year. Like I haven't like gone like viral or anything, but it's really, truly thank you. If you told me, this wasn't even on my radar at this point last year, if you had told me that I would start a successful limited podcast and even guest host on Lords of Limited in 2025 in January of 2025, I would not have believed you. So really thank you for listening to me talk every week. Here's to another great year of limited in 2026. If you want to reach out to me, you can find me on Blue Sky at sampratt.basky.social, Discord at samp6, and I stream on Twitch at samp_mtg, just in case you want to come and yell at me for liking Tarkir Dragonstorm more than everyone else. Thanks for listening. See you next week.